Maggie, are you fit? Yes.
Yes, I'm raring to go.
Jolly good.
I don't know if I'll be able to see people as they drop off, but just snooze quietly with your mute buttons on, and we'll do fine.
Yeah. So, how this came about is that Maggie's mum is at the manor, and we were chatting, and the conversation drifted into Maggie's into Ilse's sister, Maggie's mum's sister, and the story of how they came to the UK and the treasure trove of poems and stories that Maggie found of her aunts, and she's now produced a book on it. And I read the book and I thought, well, this is just a lovely story. And I asked Maggie if she would like to come and tell us about her mum and her sister. And I think there's a thread that runs through. So if I can ask everybody to mute yourselves, I'll put Maggie onto spotlight for everyone.
Right. Come on now. That's it. Right. Here we go. Okay, can everybody see something on the screen that may or may not include me? Yep.
We're okay.
Good.
We're good.
Okay, so, I mean, Keith's given me a brilliant introduction here. What we need to sort of think about is my dear mum and her sister. They were born in Mainz in Germany in the mid-1920s to a fairly well-off business family. You know, they were not poor by any means. And Mainz had a very thriving German community, Jewish community at the time. A long established Jewish community and well integrated and very, very well heeled. And then, of course, Hitler came along. Things started to change. But during Mum's life, she was born in 1925. Her sister was 4 years older, born in 1921, Eva, or Eva. We always call her Eva. And what they loved more than anything, and I'll just say now, I apologize for the quality of these slides because they're scanned by a very inefficient person who can't see straight, hence they're all wonky, and they're scanned from Mum's old photographs, and so it's all a bit wonky. But this is them in better times when they lived in Germany, when they went to Switzerland for their holidays. They would go on boat rides on the Rhine. They, you know, this was normal teenage life for them in Germany. Eva was an incredibly keen outdoor person. She loved skiing. She loved nothing better than walking and being up the mountains. What happened, of course, in Nazi Germany, we all know about. In 1936, things were looking pretty rough. And my grandfather had the foresight to send Eva, who was 4 years older than my mother, over to England for schooling. And they found a Methodist foundation school, interestingly, down in Eastbourne called Moira House. And Eva went there and was educated there for a while. She was aged 15 at the time. She always wrote. She always wrote. She wrote plays, she wrote music, she wrote poems, she wrote everything. I knew nothing about this at all until Mum moved in with us when her Parkinson's became so bad she couldn't live on her own. She moved in with us, we sold her house, and I found this great box of stuff in her attic, which was Eva's writing. And it was, you know, loads of it. And so during lockdown, when I was isolated because I'd been pinged, I typed it all up because it was something to do. And I fell in love with Eva. I never knew anything about her, really. And I started the process of trying to find out more about her. Found these photos. So what Eva did when she came over here was what Eva was always going to do, which is make a success of communicating. And within 2 terms of being here, a 15-year-old in a foreign language, she produced this poem, which was published in the Shuttle in the school magazine. In English, she's been here 2 terms, she's age 15. You come from afar, of many countries seen, and travelling you came across the sea. You have to towns, to lands, on oceans been. You saw the Alps in all their majesty, and through the lonely desert you did go. Then Afric's southern cross stood o'er your head. You saw the northern everlasting snow where reindeer or the endless landscape fled. Now tell me, what has happened overseas since I have been there many years before? Is there still justice, brotherhood and peace? Or do the trumpets loudly blow to war? Oh, is the old world still the same, I pray? You answer not, but turn your head away. Now, I don't know many 15-year-olds who could produce that. I certainly don't know many 15-year-olds who could produce it in a foreign language when they don't know what on earth is happening to their parents back home. And on it goes. So this is where her English poetry career really starts. She then produces something every year while she's at school, and then there's this one which is getting a little bit more edgy, which was 2 years later. I dreamt I saw the Conqueror driving in state, and his people were cheering as he passed through the gate. Yet methought a hearse his carriage was, rattling to guide to the graveyard a coffin with a vanquished one inside. I dreamt I saw the Conqueror thus leave his state, though the cheering was sneering as he rolled through the gate. Pretty heavy stuff, I think, pretty heavy stuff. She's 17 by now. She then left school and went on to do typing training in London. And this is where it all gets a little bit hazy, and we're not quite sure. There are various bits missing. So while I was trying to do this researching, no, I'll just stop there for a moment. So she went on to London to train as a secretary. We're now in 1938. My mother's still back in Germany. She came over to visit Eva in the summer of 1938 and at school, and got on very well with everybody in the school. In November 1938, we have Kristallnacht, when the Nazis just trashed and smashed everything that belonged to anybody Jewish. And by then it was quite clear that Mum had to get out of Germany. They had to get out of Germany if they possibly could. So my grandfather arranged for one of his business colleagues in England to come across to the UK, to Germany, and bring Mum over to England for safekeeping. And that in itself was an adventure. You can imagine trying to get out of Nazi Germany at that time. But Mum did come across, and Moira House School down in Eastbourne took my mother in and said they would educate her for free for as long as she needed it, because obviously nobody knew if my Oma and Opa, her parents, were ever going to get out of Germany. So this little miracle was happening all the way through both their lives. Eva had got out early enough and had established herself in England. Mum then managed to get out and came over. And a few months later, Oma and Opa did come over, they did get out. But all of this charity happening around the place was amazing. Now, poor Eva was at this training course that she absolutely hated learning to type. She loathed it. And one day she went into the course, and all over the newspapers was everything about Kristallnacht. How people were being killed, how properties were being trashed, how nobody knew what was happening, how it was absolutely awful, and we were likely to go to war, and all of this. And poor Eva is sitting there in this dreadful typing pool, not knowing what's happened to her family. And according to my mother, all the girls in the typing pool just completely ignored her and had no idea what sort of torment she was going through, which is dreadfully sad, I think. Maybe that's how you cope. You have to close your ears to some things. So these little snippets I'd got from my mother, because she wrote a book called From Generation to Generation, which was really about her father and the family in Germany. And I thought I need to try and find out a bit more about Eva. And so I typed, like you do with Google, I knew she'd had some connection with an Nye Bevan, you know, the guy who started the health service. I knew there was a connection somewhere. So just randomly, I typed Eva Metzger, Nye Bevan into Google. And I came up with a reference to a book by a chap called Nick Simon Thomas, who, as you'll know, because he's a name on everybody's lips, is the current Shadow Home Secretary. And he has written a book about Nye Bevan, and up came this page from my Google search. Now, if you look down the bottom, this is all about Nye Bevan, but if you look to sort of where it says number 49, there was always a part of Bevan that he wanted for himself. hidden from public view. Indeed, so hidden are the poems that they don't seem to have survived in any archive. He was writing poems. This is despite the fact that Bevan always preserved the works of others that he was given. He kept a number of manuscript poems and a short story from another Jewish lady, Eva Metzger, among his private papers. So this amazing politician, who I had never, ever, ever heard of, has unearthed something about my aunt, directly relating him to Nye Bevan. And being cheeky, I wrote to Nick Simon Thomas and I said, where did you get this from? Can you tell me, where is the stuff that Eva shared with Nye? And he said, well, that's in the family archive. And this is the address of Nye's great-great-niece. So I got in touch with Nye's great-great-niece, and everybody has been so wonderful, so helpful, apart from the army, who haven't. Well, that's another story. And she came back and she said, oh, yes, he was very keen and blah, 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 blah. And she sent me a family photo from her own family, which is Nye's father, David, and his mother, Phoebe, and his sister, Arianwen. And the link between Eva and Nye is that Eva and her mother were evacuated from London, and they ended up lodging with Phoebe Bevan in Tredegar in South Wales. So this very austere-looking woman on the left with the photo there was taking in Jewish refugees, was taking in people, because of course it fitted entirely with the political system that Nye Bevan was setting up. So they lodged with the Bevans, and Eva ended up doing administrative work for Nye in his constituency. And she started getting stuff published in Tribune, which was the very, very left-wing newspaper that Nye was editor of. And so she was up there with the greats in lots of ways. And if we have time at the end, it depends how awake you can say. I can read you a couple of the poems from that period, because they're quite feisty. So here she is working for Nye, and then the call to arms goes up for women, because at this point, obviously war has been declared, but women weren't officially part of the armed forces. So Eva volunteered to join the ATS, which was where women went at that time. And she worked in the ATS, as far as I know, in Wales for quite a while, and kept in touch with the Bevans. And in fact, Phoebe, way after the war, went to visit my grandparents in London. The bond between the two families was apparently very, very lovely. And my mother remembers her very clearly coming to the house in London to visit. So she joined the ATS and she wrote lots and lots of interesting stuff, funny stuff. I mean, apart from the serious political side of Eva, there was a lot of very funny stuff in her writing about the people she was billeted with, about what it was like when everybody's drunk around you and you're not. And she wrote poems and short stories and things that she called prose poems, which are very, very lovely as well. So very spectrum of things. And she wrote her own music. So she wrote a poem called Khaki Soldier, and this is the music which we unearthed in the box, the magic box, to accompany. And Mark, I don't know if you can sing it. I haven't actually tried to play it, but it's probably quite good. I haven't been there yet. So she's doing all this writing. She's doing her serving in the ATS, and she gets a nice ATS uniform. And by all accounts, is all right. She's doing okay. She's found a camaraderie. Somebody's just put a chat in, which I daren't read because I'll probably lose the screen. I'll come back to it in a bit. So, but round about this time, she started having a bit of ill health. She was getting a little bit unwell. She was then taken out of the ATS and taken into the intelligence corps, the intelligence service. Now, somebody like Eva was incredibly useful to the intelligence service because she was bilingual, and she was obviously going to be very, very useful to them, sorting out all the stuff that was coming in from Germany. So she was posted. This is why she now has her sergeant stripes. but she's now in the intelligence service, and apparently you got promoted to sergeant when you went into the intelligence service. She was posted somewhere called Latimer House, which is where they took in German prisoners of war, mainly officers, and they bugged their rooms, and they bugged all the common areas, and they bugged the windowsills, and they bugged the gardens. So they had a complete ear of everything that was being said by the Germans to each other. They recognized that taking people for interrogation into a room one-to-one wasn't going to get them the information they wanted, and they knew that casual conversation was the way to find out the real intelligence. So a whole raft of people were sitting in the cellars, listening in, typing up, and then Eva was one of the people who did the translating, and then they sent it off to the higher authorities if there was something there that was worth chasing up. And things like where they were going to have missile placements, when they were likely to be moving, all these sorts of things rippled through, really useful information. But also this was where the first inklings of the concentration camps came through. So this was where they first heard the German officers bragging about making lampshades from prisoners' skin. You know, this was the sort of stuff that these guys were listening to. And this was the sort of stuff that Eva was translating. And how you go through everything that she and her family have gone through, and then listen to what's happening to those members of your family that didn't get out. I don't know. You know, it just seems to me the most awful, cruel, dreadful thing to do to anybody. But she did it. She then got moved to an even more difficult place called the London Cage, which was in Kensington, where they did fairly brutal interrogation. A chap called Alexander Scotland, a general who was later hauled up by whichever military authorities he was hauled up by, because he broke every rule in the book. And of course, Eva was sworn to secrecy about all of this, you know, the Official Secrets Act and everything else going on there. She couldn't speak to anybody about it. She got through the war. She just about got through the war. She wasn't very well by then. She was increasingly getting sick. She changed her name from Metzger to Massey. And I'm told that a lot of people with very German names did change their names to something much more English, because it was going to help integration, and it was also going to sort of create a new persona after the war. So you become a new person rather than the disadvantaged person who suffered everything that they suffered. At this point, she also went back to some of the work that she'd written before and revamped it. And so we've got 2 or 3 different copies where she's changed things. So some of them are written under the name Eva Metzger, some of them are then adapted under the name Eva Massey. So there's a sort of a transition going on in her life. She did one last trip. She was quite poorly by now. She'd been diagnosed with Hodgkin's lymphoma, cancer of the lymph nodes. But she made one trip back to her beloved Switzerland with her father in 1949. And this is the sort of last bit of wonderful serendipitous stuff that sometimes happens. They stayed in the same hotel as Gerard Hoffnung. I don't know how many of you know Gerard Hoffnung, who did that wonderful Bricklayer's Story, and he does those little cartoons of musicians and all the rest of it. And he was staying in the same hotel, and he was apparently a very insecure, anxious little man. And he looked on my grandfather as a father figure, and he hung around with them all the time they were there. And oh, Don, can you just go and fetch the portrait? He did it's just inside the bedroom door. He did a portrait of my grandfather, a cartoon of my grandfather. And Eva said, please do one of me. And he said, no, I will never, ever draw cartoons of women, because whatever you do, they are always dissatisfied, and I'm not going to do it. But he drew this picture of my grandfather. And on the year he died, my grandfather looked more like that. This was 1949. And that was exactly how Upar looked when he died. You know, you grow into your caricature. So that's, you know, another little bit of serendipity. Anyway, they came back. She was very sick. She was very ill. She wrote a poem about how ill she was on the boat coming back. And then On the 10th of August 1950, she died in London, and my grandfather's watch stopped at the moment she died, according to my mother, and it happens. Why not? Now, in the meantime, my mother, of course, was growing up. She was leaving school. She desperately wanted to be a doctor. She couldn't easily be a doctor because she was an alien. And somebody said, well, second best thing might be a dentist then. So she trained as a dentist. She worked for many years as a school dentist and got a lot of joy out of that and thoroughly enjoyed it. She got married. She had me. She had my brother. All the grandchildren followed on. And she became a JP. She was on one of the chairs of the bench. She was the first lay chair of the Cambridge Council of Churches, who was female, sorry, the first female chair, lay chair of the Council of Churches, and did that for a long time, and generally went on and had a pretty successful life after Eva had died. So Eva, after the war, very, very few brief moments out of uniform. And then my mother, in 1989, did what she'd always wanted to do and got a degree. She said she was the only person in the family who hadn't got a degree and she wanted one, and she worked her socks off to get her Open University degree. And I'm just so proud of her and all she's done, and this wretched, stupid Parkinson's rubbish that you all know so much about got her and is just making her life miserable, but people like Keith are helping phenomenally with her. But as long as I have known my mother, it's quite a long time now, she has had on her bedside table this picture of Eva. It's always been there, and Eva and my mother have just always been together. And that's it, really. And I'd sort of quite like to, if I may, read you from Eva a poem that she called Ending, because it seemed appropriate to end with one that she called Ending. Now, my dear, good night, goodbye. We've met and laughed and been happy as the angels. Why should a tear our joy demean? Why should, now the day is sealed, bitterness remain alone, and to vain complaining yield all the mercy we have known? Who else owns such souvenir? Turn the seasons as they may, just remember this, my dear, we have held one happy day, lived one day. And now, good night. Let no hurt these seconds stain. Why should after all delight, grief and pain alone remain? See those clouds, now found, now lost, silent in their wind-borne file. Let us, like the silver host, greet our parting with a smile.
What a finish.
So that's it.
What a finish. Yeah. Let me take you off spotlight.
I'll stop sharing too.
That's great. Thank
you. Thank you for listening. I've not done that before, and it's really quite interesting to see how I feel about doing it. So,
Maggie, I'm very
just going to have a look in the chats. Oh, happy Hanukkah. Thank you. Thank you.
I think it's a lovely story, even better for the telling, sort of rather than off the page. So thank you so much for sharing very, very personal stuff about the family. It's a delight. Anybody got any comments? Anybody any questions?
I thought it was fascinating. Very good.
Thank you.
It was wonderful, Maggie, really wonderful. And I found that last poem extremely moving.
Yeah, she did some very moving stuff. She did some beautiful stuff. I could read them to you for the next 6 hours.
Yeah.
Mark.
Maggie.
Sorry, Mark's got his hand up.
Oh, sorry, Mark.
Thank you. Fascinating and lovely story. A sort of reflective question. And the question is, so what's changed? This country embraced refugees, embraced migrants, and why are we so hostile now?
But you know, it didn't. It didn't for a very, very long time. even when all the stories were coming out of Germany, and people like Nye were pushing and pushing, it didn't happen. And you could only come over if you had somebody to sponsor you. And,
Yeah.
you know, so I mean, it hasn't changed. We had to do it in the end, and my parents were lucky, and my mother was lucky, her parents were lucky, because they had the contact. But we were very, very slow at getting off the mark. So in some ways it hasn't changed. And it's about bloody time it did, quite honestly. It is just awful, absolutely awful.
And I think the real message behind that is that the immigrants bring so much to the tapestry of the country. You know, they contribute so much.
There was a very interesting thing in the Guardian the other day, and I can't remember what it was. But somebody walked through London from Oxford Street to Trafalgar Square, maybe, noting all the buildings along the way that had been significantly driven by Jewish immigrants. And the list was phenomenal. Sorry, I'm not pushing a Jewish ticket here. I'm really not. I'm not a Jew. I'm confirmed in the Church of England. I don't go to church. I don't have any baggage apart from historic baggage in that view. But it was absolutely fascinating. Every landmark they came to, you know, whether it was a theatre, whether it was a laboratory, whether it was a university department, whatever, there was a significant Jewish name attached to it all the way along that route. Very, very interesting. I'm not going to say any more about that. Different story.
Can I do a plug for your little book?
Can you? Well, you can, but I don't really want that. Well, let me just say something about my little book.
Yeah.
My little book looks like that. And we called it The Opening Chord. And this writing on the front is actually a letter home that Eva wrote when she was at school, cursing the exams she was having to study for. It's very funny, actually. If you want, I could read it. A little book I typed up in lockdown and then sent to a printer and never proofread it. And it is rubbish in terms of the proofreading. If anybody would like a copy, I'm happy to distribute them through Keith. But really, 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 it is not published and it is not proofread, and it is difficult to read through the lack of proofreading. But if you'd like one, I have several copies.
It's not that there's not that many typos. You're being very, very self-critical. if anybody is interested, it's not very thick, probably 100 pages maybe, but it's a lovely read, and the stories and the poems are much, you know, they are just beautiful, and it's really what triggered me to ask Maggie to talk to us. So Margaret,
may I read you my favourite of all of her poems, which is called The Minuet?
Hang on, before you do that, Maggie, Margaret's got her hand up.
Sorry, Margaret, can't see you.
Thank you. I just wanted to say that coincidentally last week, I heard a talk by someone who has written a book about the children born to GIs in this country, particularly black GIs, and the way they were treated and the way their mothers were treated. Some were welcomed, a very few, but most of them we were not at all tolerant about. No. Some of the mothers were married and they hadn't seen their husbands for years. Others weren't, so they had a mixed race child, which was illegitimate, and both were terrible things in those days. So we were not that tolerant to everybody.
No, we weren't. And there's a link to that, Margaret. I think it's linked to that. There is an interesting online exhibition, which is, it's an Anglia Ruskin one, isn't it?
Yes, that's right.
And,
yes,
and it's called Black Babies exhibition.
Brown babies?
Black Babies.
Oh, I thought it was, yes, okay.
So I'm pretty certain if you just type Black Babies, Anglia Ruskin University into Google, it comes up. Because I saw a piece on the telly and I went and looked at it, and it is, as you say, heartbreaking and heartwarming and heartrending and just heartful, really.
Yeah.
It is extraordinary. Yeah. No, tolerance is a passing phase from time to time, isn't it?
Well, this was an era when places to stay put up signs saying no Chinese, no blacks, no Irish.
I know. Even, you know, and
no dogs.
and no dogs, and in the same notice. Absolutely. It's just...
So do we flatter ourselves that we're somehow a tolerant society? Because our dominant myth is that, and hence really my question about what's changed, and I think your very helpful response, which says, well, no, not really. We still have within us that deep prejudice and racism.
Well, it's all relative, isn't it? I mean, this is not a unique characteristic of the British.
No.
It's not at all. Absolutely not. But I mean, the interesting thing is the myth is perpetuated somehow because these poor souls who are trying to get here believe they're going to have a good life when they arrive. But it may be a better life than what they're escaping. It probably is better, but my goodness me, it's not welcoming and warm and cuddly and all the things that they presumably have come to believe that it is going to be. And it's, well, in my view, it's tragic, but that's me. It's, yeah.
Trish, you've got your hand up.
Yes, a friend of mine, her grandmother married an Austrian who she worked with. He was taken off to a concentration camp in the Isle of Man.
Yes.
As soon as he came back at the end of the war, she lost her British citizenship because she was married to a German.
Right. Yeah.
Well, an Austrian, and they were sent back to Austria. She didn't speak any German.
Yeah. My grandfather was interned on the Isle of Man. It's one of these incredible things, isn't it? Again, the sort of warped sense of political minds. So here is a Jew who is escaping the most awful things in Germany. But because it was Germany and we were at war with Germany, he was therefore an alien and therefore a risk. Where you think he might actually have been quite useful in fighting against the people that he was trying to get away from. No, they put him along with several thousand others up on the Isle of Man. And the one thing that my mother remembers about it, apart from his absence, is that my grandmother arranged to have a chair sent to him because he was complaining there was nowhere to sit and his bottom was sore. So she arranged for this little three-legged chair to be sent up to the camp. So it was a strange sort of environment, very strange. He was there for quite a while, and there was a little booklet called Behind the Wire, which shows you that they really made very, very good communities for themselves up there because it was a prisoner of war camp. It was an internment rather than a concentration camp. So, you know, it was a place to hold them. But very interesting stuff, yeah.
I see you've joined us, Caroline, from darkest Colorado in the US.
An early start.
Caroline, are you there?
In name only.
In name only. It's a front. So, Maggie, you was going to read a poem.
I was going to read one that is called Minuet.
Yes.
Called The Minuet, and this was written in 1941. And I just think it's well, I'll just read it and you tell me what you think it is. It's set in France. They danced that dance together, their faces white and set. That night up in the palace, they danced the minuet. Violin was leading and flute and oboe too. They passed in rows and couples while up the hill there grew the clamour of men singing, grim shouts and threats, a drum. Come, children of the people, march on, the day has come. They twined in rows and couples, joined in the final round, advancing, backing, turning, and never smiled nor frowned. Maman, what means this drumming and the rattling wagonette? Be calm, my child, 'tis nothing. Come, dance the minuet. Papa, pray where is Hugo, and Pierre, and Antoinette? Hush, hush, my child, be silent. Join in the minuet. They tripped beneath the candles in the long mirrored hall when by the bolted portal they heard the watchman call. They heard the portal breaking and pausing saw the flares of torches in the courtyard, while up the open stairs there rose the sound of singing, grim shouts and threats, a drum. Come, children of the people, march on, the day has come. The guests slid back in silence and watched their host advance, who seizing bow and fiddle himself struck up the dance. They grouped, their hands clasped tightly, their faces white but set. Thus, as the door burst open, they danced the minuet.
It's wonderful.
Yeah. Yes. That makes you
It says a
shiver.
lot.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Makes you shiver. Can I ask everybody just put their hands together for Maggie, please? Just
And for Ilse and Eva.
and for
Ilse
Ilse
and
and
Eva.
Eva. Yes, indeed. Yes,
Very
indeed.
good.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a delight to meet you all, and thank you for being interested, because it's very much a personal family story, and they can be turgidly boring, I know.
Well, could I say, Maggie, a great big thank you on behalf of us all. I mean, I do some work with the Wolf Institute in Cambridge, which is, as you'll know, a multi-faith centre. And sometimes there is criticism of research being done into history as to, how the different faiths in that case, rather than, if you like, political creeds, sort of clash. And there's sometimes there's this challenge which says, well, why is that relevant? I think it's deeply relevant and so important that you write down your story in the way you have done, because I think it's only in this way that we do have to confront where we are now with migration and immigration and the way we are treating people who, and I'm not trying to make equivalence between the situation in Nazi Germany and Syria and Afghanistan and Iraq and so on. For me, that's not the point. It's where is our humanity? So you have demonstrated wonderful humanity, and thank you so much for sharing your story.
Thank you for listening. I'm going to go now before anybody says anything that I don't like.
Oh, I could do that, Maggie.
Yeah.
I could do that.
Yeah, go by sure ahead, Maggie. Thank you so much.
I'm going to quit. Thank you all so much for listening.
You're
Take
welcome.
care now.
I'll catch up with you soon, Maggie.
Bye.
Yeah, now Trish has said she'd like to see the book, so Keith, can we coordinate that at some point with anybody else?
I'll put a note out if anybody wants a copy.
And I'll give you a lump. Okay, brilliant. Thanks so much, everybody. Bye.
Thanks,
Bye.
Maggie. Bye now.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.